Hi, today we're going to be discussing about whether or not we should teach prepositions. Recently, one of the teachers that I know made a point that one should not teach prepositions to Thai students because it's too advanced for them. And I'm talking about Mathayom 3 and about 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, I definitely don't agree with that opinion. This is why. Why was that teacher talking like that about prepositions? And this particular person's also against teaching past tense to Thai students. Well, I would agree that if your class is at a level where they're just picking up words, then yeah, but completely avoiding prepositions and then teaching them a few sentences here and there is not going to get anyone anywhere. So, what do you think? Should you teach or should you not teach prepositions, verbs, nouns? I am not of the opinion that grammar should be taught as grammar. Nobody ever learned any language learning its grammar. I mean, that's not how I learned English or anybody else would learn English. It doesn't come from textbooks. It has to come from context. While you highlight context along with grammar, that's the right approach. That's what I believe. And I can clearly see that there's definitely a difference between trained and untrained teachers. I can't make certain comments on camera, but you know where I'm going. So this whole video is about opinions and stronger opinions. What should be and shouldn't be taught. And some people are of the opinion that you start with the alphabet, although there are no names or context here. I would definitely love to hear your opinion on what is the right curriculum for Thai students who are just starting out. They have no clue about anything. They just probably know a few words and you can count them on your fingers. So everything else is new and has to be acquired. I believe it's good to mimic the process of natural learning. So no baby is ever taught. Grammar is never taught. Lessons or reading, maybe reading and writing, but definitely not conversation the way it's taught in informal settings. So there's a fine line there, and what I'm trying to get at is try to create a discussion and see what are the best ways possible and what kind of lessons should be taught and should not be taught for effective learning. Now that's a very broad term. Like if I say effective learning and so on, my goals for the year is if I can get my students to introduce themselves, be able to give directions, order food, talk about food, very important in Thai culture. And the type of interactions that they may have with foreigners are usually around food, accommodation, giving directions, greetings, describing things in general, and understanding very basic sentences. So I would put them in categories that are related to these kind of topics. Like I would teach them about how to call a taxi. What would they say in an airport? A lot of them don't know how to count, so I would teach them counting and using numbers. Most of them can count from 1 to 10. Beyond that is a big question. I'm talking about rural schools. I'm not talking about like international schools out of Bangkok. Yeah, they probably speak as good as I do, or even better. So I'm not talking about those particular schools. I'm talking about small schools or big schools in rural areas of Isan, where the places I know, things are very different. So if they can, it's a real achievement if a student can introduce themselves. And most of my students, I wouldn't say all, but most of my students have taught, who've learned introductions and introducing themselves and talking about their friends in very basic sentences is great. For me, that's an achievement. The next thing that I would want them to learn is to go to a shop and ask for things like, I want this or that, or describe what they want, or how much is it, understanding money. So these are basic topics that I believe every student who's just starting out to learn English and who doesn't have a background or the incentive to practice this language. It's just like me learning French back in India. I just did that because I had to get through the second language exams during my graduation. I still don't speak good, forget about good French. I can't speak basic French. I can understand a bit here and there though. It's like, it's still an alien language. And I clearly understand why that happens, because French is not spoken where I grew up. English is. Therefore, there is no reason why I should be taking it seriously, even if I had academic goals. The same thing applies here. Most Thai students do not need to learn English. However, if they realize its importance, it's great for their careers. So, yeah, so that's the big point here. Like, how much should one be taught? Like, one student be taught in a year? How much is too much? How much is too little? It's always a big question for teachers. I would love to know, because most teachers have different goals, different curriculum. How do foreign teachers, especially if you're from the United States or Canada, or any foreign teacher for that matter, what do? Do you just do the TEFL thing, show picture cards and read a couple of sentences as target language and say, hey, my 50 minutes is up and so is my lesson? Or do you go about really attempting to get a conversation together with your students and not focus so much on how you spend your 50 minutes in the class? Because I'm totally against just showing a few pictures. That would work. That would certainly work with like lower grades, like, Prathom. That's a great way of teaching Prathom, or Anuban. That's fine. But when you come to Mathayom, or students about 12 years, would you still want to just stick to a few words and not roll them into sort of conversation? One good thing that I learned, I will give you this example. One of my classes, like when they were in Mathayom 3, I was their teacher, and then they came over to Mathayom 4. Unfortunately, I was again their teacher. The first thing the rules that I set in the class is try not to speak Thai to me as much as possible, especially if you want to ask me a question. Now that's being kind of harsh, but it had its results. I gave them classroom language. I always start with classroom language. And I told them, if you want to ask me if something is right, you have to say, is it correct? So I gave them a few sentences, about 10, 15 sentences that, like, how do you say this in English? What does this mean? How do I write this? How do I spell this? Stuff like that. To my surprise, about 8 to 10 students started using it. And it rolled over to the next year. Yeah, it did. So that was great for me. So I felt good. And I feel that as long as you don't connect to your students, they're not going to learn. Because, what was that? Oh, it's my other camera. Anyway, so yeah, connecting to them like in a personal way with each student. How do I do that? You have to address them by their names. You need to know their names. You need to know how they behave in the class and what you can and cannot take. For instance, if you have students who don't come to your class regularly, then you need to set goals with them. Have a constructive conversation. And I never give them a negative, never shout or tell them get out of the class or do this, do that. That is not a nice approach in a learning environment. You have to be positive. I've seen crazy teachers, like, some of them shouting and top their voice in English, and none of the students understand what this guy is saying. On top of that, I'll tell you a funny incident that I experienced because I was invited by another teacher to witness his class and give him some kind of feedback. I don't know what it was, but he said, "Come over, watch me." He started screaming all over the place because somebody wasn't listening to him, and he created a little prison and put that student in a prison, like between four chairs. Another time he asked them to go around the building and so on. Well, I don't believe in that approach at all, and I think that's very counterproductive. Shows that's not a very I'm choosing my words carefully here, but I would love to say untrained, or doesn't understand the learning environment clearly. I mean, it's for the teacher, not the students. So yeah, so these mistakes have to be avoided. And what do you think about it? Write me in the comments. I mean, wherever you teach, whatever you teach, Japanese, Chinese, it's all the same. So basically, the environment has to be positive. There has to be trust between the teacher and the students. It has to be friendly. Then language acquisition has to start at a very basic level and getting increasingly complicated over time. So if I have 10 opportunities to see one set of students and they can just learn how to introduce themselves and maybe speak a few more sentences, that's good. That's an achievement. I'm sure many teachers would agree with me on this, especially foreign teachers. My experience, I would say, with time, like 2 or 3 classes, yeah, students should look up to you.